Hello, hi everyone. Welcome. Our first webinar of what feels like summer here in New York City. Really excited to have you all here with us today. Takes just a little bit for us all to get in with Zooms, letting everyone in one at a time, but we're really excited to have you here. We're going to get started just in about a minute. And so if you've been with us before, we know we love that you say hello. So please put in the chat who you are, what you do, and where you're coming from. I know we have people from all over the world, and so it's really great. We're so excited to have this conversation today. I think that this is a really important conversation that we don't believe as a collective. So our wonderful panelists today is being talked about enough. And so really excited to have you all here as we really going to dive into like what AI means for children, for child well-being, student well-being, because this is something that we know there has been an enormous impact of technology on student well-being already with the advent of devices, internet, and of course, social media. And so now that we have this new arrival technology, where this technology is something that it's not just impacting us as educators and leaders and industry people, but also really students. And so there's a recent piece of research that we're going to be talking about today, and Andrew's going to come on screen in a moment, that talks about this, but also we know from research that students have been interacting with things like Snapchat AI for a full year, all the way down to 7 and 8 years old. And so we're really going to start focusing on what I think will be the first of many conversations on the impact of AI on student well-being. But I'm actually going to just remind everyone, if you've been here before or not, this is your first webinar with us. It is meant to be a community of practice, so I really appreciate everyone that's already said hello in the chat. What we're going to do is use the chat to kind of share resources, chat with everybody. But if there's a specific question for the panel, if you can put that into the Q&A, that would be great. So that makes it a little bit easier because we do have a really active chat. So we want to make sure that we don't miss any of those great questions. But if you do have a resource, let's say that you have a piece that you really love, or a strategy around student well-being and AI, please put that into the chat. And we'll be dropping some of those resources in as we go as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come off share, and I'm actually going to invite Andrew Burr. And I have to say, Andrew is a kindred spirit in a lot of ways. But when I first talked to Andrew about generative AI, the first thing that we had to talk about was this idea of what will the impact be on well-being and students themselves. And so there's a lot of great research that's come out of Opportunity Labs. If you want to come on screen, Andrew, that would be great. And what we're going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to introduce himself, but also to run us through a quick kind of 7-minute overview of the research. Evidence is the most important thing that we have today, especially in this new crazy time. So to be able to situate that together is really important. And then what we're going to do is we have a couple of really awesome panelists that are going to come on, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Andrew, and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda, for the warm welcome, to the AI for Education team for coordinating. And thanks to everyone for joining. I guess I should say good evening, good afternoon, good morning, since it seems like there's folks from all over the world on this call. Thanks for being here, taking time out of your busy schedules, and more importantly, thanks for the work that you do on behalf of kids every day. So as Amanda mentioned, I am Andrew Buer. I am from Opportunity Labs. We are a national nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 5 years. And I also teach at Princeton University here in New Jersey. So what I am hoping to do in the next 5 minutes is to build a foundation for what we hope is a very practical and pragmatic conversation. I want to spend those 5 minutes basically talking about 3 things: why we undertook this research that we're going to discuss, what we learned, and then some policy considerations. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see this. All right, so we put a national survey in the field in partnership with Rebecca Oliver and her team, who you will meet momentarily, and had a really great response, almost 600 respondents. So I want to start fundamentally by talking about why we undertook this research. There's basically 2 reasons. First, I think we can disagree about the scale of harm to kids caused by increased screen time and social media use over the last 14-ish years. But to argue that those concerns are baseless or too minimal to matter, I think just isn't supported by the evidence anymore at this point. So I'm sure so many of you on this call have experienced the suffering that children and families and schools and communities have had to navigate since the early 2010s because of kids' online lives. And of course, within schools, school-based health staff, including school social workers, have acutely felt this impact. You know, when we talk to district superintendents and school leaders and school-based health staff, we hear again and again the stories about these really troubling instances of impact that they have had to navigate. And so if generative AI has the potential to exacerbate these challenges, even a little bit, we thought it was really important to understand the perspectives of folks that are closest to kids. And one of those roles, obviously within schools, is school social workers. And so we really tried to get a sense of their perspective across a range of issues related to generative AI. That's the first reason we undertook this research. The second reason is that school social workers are super unique, right? They have a unique set of skills. Their role is really unique. They are incredibly proximate to students, staff, and families. And we think that they should be at the table when policy and programmatic decisions are being made that have the potential to influence their work. And obviously, the adoption of new technologies has the potential to do exactly that. Okay, so what did we learn? Everybody hopefully has seen this research. If you haven't, you can check it out. I think the AI for Ed team shared it with everyone. But I want to highlight maybe three non-obvious takeaways that we have been thinking about as a result of this research. So first, we call this the don't knows and the neutrals. There were lots of don't know and neutral answers across questions. We think that's actually pretty meaningful because the don't knows and neutrals represent knowledge gaps in what school social workers know about generative AI, to no fault of their own, of course. We actually think this is directly attributable to the fact that access to AI literacy programming for school-based health staff, including school social workers, is uneven at best and non-existent in a lot of cases. So that's the first non-obvious takeaway. Second, we call this the what, the how. Respondents overwhelmingly agreed about potential risks associated with the adoption of generative AI. And I want to emphasize the word potential, right? There are risks related to safety and data privacy and cognitive development and certainly mental and social well-being. And I think we can call these the what, right? But respondents were also deeply unsure about how these risks would manifest. And, you know, I think if we're being honest intellectually with ourselves, no one really knows the answer to how just yet. But there are starting to be some really smart projections about how these risks might, and might is bold and capitalized here, manifest, which we think is really meaningful. Third important non-obvious takeaway we're thinking about as out of the loop. And maybe this isn't as non-obvious as the first two takeaways that I discussed, but I think it might be the most eye-opening. School social workers are just out of the loop too much when it comes to the adoption of new technologies in schools. They aren't consulted as frequently and consistently as they should be. And as a result, they aren't talking to important stakeholders, including families, as often as they should be about these issues. So the three big non-obvious takeaways, the don't knows and the neutrals, the what's but not the hows, and then the fact that school social workers and honestly, most school-based health staff, including school nurses and school counselors, are often out of the loop when it comes to conversations about the adoption of emerging technologies in schools and in the classroom in particular. Okay. Again, you have the research. This is the full list of policy considerations that we codified after reading the research. But if I could summarize, I would effectively say three things. Leaders at the district level, at the school level, should be asking as many questions and seeking as much input as possible from folks that are closest to kids, particularly folks that are dealing with the manifestation of the youth mental health crisis. And of course, that includes school social workers, but it really includes all school-based health staff and, of course, educators as well. They should be working to democratize the flow of information, and that's inclusive of access to knowledge building opportunities like the AI literacy work AI for Education provides, so that all stakeholders are informed enough to make thoughtful decisions. And then finally, I think putting in place a system of systems that help all stakeholders prepare for both potential opportunities, which are many, and potential risks associated with this new technology is going to be really, really important. So hopefully this gives folks a good sense of why we undertook this research, what we learned, and some ideas for action. But most importantly, hopefully this is a foundation for a really interactive conversation that is both pragmatic and practical. And so I'm going to pause there and pass it back to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I just want to kind of put a pin on a couple of things. First of all, we see a lot of research where people are kind of put to what like make a decision, but I think it actually is really important to have that neutral we don't know yet as actually something that social workers are identifying. And I think that when you talk about a gap in terms of like training and also in terms of being a part of those bigger conversations with technology is something that's just really important. And there's Carolyn in the chat talks about being a librarian and not being brought in. So like what we see a lot is that when schools and systems actually bring in school psychologists, counselors, and media specialists and other people that are in and around students for these generative AI trainings, you see a much richer discussion that goes way, way deeper because we're looking at the whole child now and the whole child experience in schools. And so I hope that this is a galvanizing moment to have that focus, which I think is really important. But there's also, before we bring up the panel, there was a couple questions about, this is a first step, right? So this is focused on teachers, but do you have a plan or know of a plan to bring students into the fold in terms of following up with similar questions to them about the potential harms and benefits?
Yeah, we've seen quite a bit of research already that has surveyed students. So we've seen some from Pew, we've seen some from the Walton Family Foundation, at least that was commissioned by the Walton Family Foundation. And, I would say most of that research is focused on usage practices, right? How young folks are interacting with the technology, in what ways they are utilizing it, and the extent to which they're utilizing it. I haven't seen anything that has gotten really deep on potential impacts to well-being. And so there's certainly an opportunity, I think, to broaden the conversation and bring youth voice into a deeper dialogue about the potential impacts on their well-being, which is going to be really, really critical. I think in the United Kingdom, you are starting to see some youth voice coalesce around concerns around screen time and social media, which is really, really interesting. But I will try to find and drop the links for the research that I've seen from Pew and Walton about youth interacting with these technologies as this conversation goes on.
That's great. And if my team could also find the Ofcom online survey, would be great as well. It's a UK study, but I think as a little bit of a teaser, Andrew, and for people here, we're actually going to be starting a student in AI and education community that's going to be a partner to our women in AI education community for that exactly that reason of having more opportunity for students that are concerned about the impact or just wanted to make sure that student voice is part of the conversation, because I think that that's going to be so important moving forward. So really excited to now bring up our panel, and we actually have two amazing panelists, Rebecca, who is supportive of this research, but also Marina, who is still doing the work as well. And so I'm going to call up both, and Marina, if you can come on video as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a bit of just a discussion. And I know there was a question in the Q&A about potential risks and harms, going deeper into that. So we're going to take a pragmatic approach, a balanced approach, which I know that all of us here love to have. So we are going to talk about concerns, but also potential benefits, because we always want to have that balanced approach. But we start with every single webinar starts the same way with our panelists, which is, do you mind introducing yourself and then talking about that first time that you interacted with generative AI? So we're going to start with Marina. If you want to go first, that would be amazing.
So hi, everybody. Thank you again for putting together this webinar and panel. So my name is Dr. Marina Badillo Diaz. I am a school social worker working in education for the past 10 years. I started in K through 8 education as a school social worker, moved into a leadership role and position as a youth development director in an alternative transfer high school setting here in New York City. But most recently, I've been teaching school social work at the master's level, so teaching future social workers and also doing consulting in K through 12 schools. And so a bit about my entry into using generative AI really came about a year ago as I am scrolling on my consultant Instagram account of these reels on generate content with AI, put these prompts into ChatGPT. And I'm a social worker. I didn't go to school for marketing, and this is a really big challenge of mine to put together content for my social media pages. And I just found it so useful and practical to try ChatGPT, and it really just grew from there as I'm doing multiple projects at the same time. And I just found it so useful, not just in my business, but also as a practitioner as well.
That's great. And I love you're like, what is this? What is this thing that everyone's talking about? But I love that you actually use it for productivity as well, because that as someone that's going to be as entrepreneurial as you are and also still doing the work in schools, I think it's a great way to find some balance, which is amazing. So Rebecca, same question to you. Would love to know more about you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Oliver. I, again, also want to thank Amanda and her team for pulling this together, Andrew for looping school social workers in on this really important research. I started as a school social worker, worked in school settings for over 20 years, and then I've been with the School Social Work Association of America for almost 10. And so we're just really excited to be able to really get in on these conversations as we just see, at least I have seen AI just kind of explode over the last couple years. So just seeing its impact. So I'd say maybe my first experience with it was some chat bots that I realized really weren't humans and were just regurgitating some information to me, and then did become familiar with ChatGPT last year through my husband and his work and some ways he was stepping into that area.
Yes. And I think that chatbots were pretty bad for a really long time, and they suddenly got pretty eerily good, which was, although some of them are still really, really bad. I think we can all agree to that. And then Andrew, you've already introduced yourself, but also what was your first, I know you kind of went all in a bit, that we met at for those that don't know, we met at a think tank around this. So I know you've been thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, I have, but it's funny, Amanda. So my wife and I were talking at dinner maybe a week ago about sort of the inverse relationship between age and first experiences. You really have to try hard to create new experiences as you get older. I don't remember interacting with generative AI for the first time, so I certainly missed that first experience. But shortly after the sort of boom a couple winters ago, there was someone that effectively rewrote a national education law using ChatGPT. And so I remember that sticking out very prominently.
Oh yeah, I think there was a lot of that very much in the beginning days where we started to see some content that probably shouldn't have been used, ChatGPT should have been used, or at least disclosed. So all very interesting. We use this kind of as our Rorschach test because we all come to it in different ways, and we all are, I think, this has become part of our lives in such a unique and intentional and unintentional way, right? Because it's something that's been what we talk about. If you're on LinkedIn, you hear this all the time, right? It feels like it's ever present, but it is really interesting because I think just to ground us back into the research, there is still an enormous knowledge gap in schools around these technologies and the potential impact. And I think that that's a big part about what we need to think about going forward. But I think one of the most interesting things is that AI is, especially chatbots, are designed to feel like they are human. There's a human or human-like intelligence on the other end. And I think that that's what I really want us to focus on in this first question about like student well-being. We're going to talk specifically around generative AI, not just AI as a larger field, but a lot of these use cases of like character AI or Snapchat AI or other tools that students are using. I would really like to understand what you think the actual impact on student well-being could be with these generative tools, starting with Marina.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's going to be a wide sort of range of the social emotional impact of the use of these generative AI tools. And again, I want to also acknowledge our youth are our most vulnerable. They are in their periods of life where their brains are still developing, they're still developing socially. And so as they're using these tools as a young person, I think there's a lot of unintentional like impact this could have. I think both, and we're going to talk about this in the webinar, both for positive use, but also for just some ethical and again, social emotional concerns. So I think for me, what I think sort of the impact can be on sort of the negative end is increasing isolation, increasing anxiety, increasing, depression. I think about the potential, the impact of bullying and how that could really be upped and amped in cyberbullying through these uses and tools of generative AI.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we see that, right? Like deep fakes, non-consensual fake nudes, the ability to not just bully like kids, but like adults as well is like a really big, like meaty potential impact that we already have seen, right? Like we don't have to wait for that to happen. And it seems to have just fallen into patterns that already existed in our schools before, but now they're being hypercharged because that ability to create things that feel real is so much at our hands now. So I think thank you for calling that out. And we'll actually, I think Amanda from our team can drop in the deep fakes piece that we did recently to that point as well. Rebecca, what do you think the impact's going to be on student well-being or has already been?
Yeah, we know Andrew touched on this in his intro that student mental health issues have been increasing and at alarming levels to where we're calling it a youth mental health crisis. And so I think, as Andrew said, if there's going to be any impact, even if it might be slight, we need to look at it very carefully. And a lot of the things Marina mentioned as well, that we're working with our most vulnerable. We as adults have to be the ones that step into that space and get the information and help youth. I know I've seen some things that I thought were real, and my husband was like, that's not real. That was made up with AI. And if as an adult, I'm not able to discriminate and use other knowledge I have to determine what's true, what's not true, how can we expect young people to do that? So I think we have to step into that space to make sure our children are safe and that we need to ask the questions and be really critical in thinking about the impact or the potential impact. And I think, as we've already said, a lot of it's unknown. We really don't know.
Yeah, and I love that idea though about like starting to think through that now. Like if it's like one of those pieces where it doesn't have to be negative, but like should we be looking at if it is like, and actually instead of like social media, what if we had actually taken a moment and said new technology in kids' hands, what would that mean to their mental health and well-being? How much different the world would be right now potentially for these young people? So it's not even like a deficit mindset. It's just like if this is going to be in the hands of students that are using it for like AI girlfriends or chatbots like Pi that were brought up by someone in the audience around they're designed to be emotional support. Like these are going to have impacts because it's never happened before. We've never had synthetic relationships are, artificial intimacy before, right? So like, let's not pay attention to it from the perspective of student mental health and well-being, and I think adult as well. So to you, Andrew, like, what do you think about in terms of that impact, like based on both the research, but also I know you have some pretty strong statements about this moment in time, we needing to stop, reflect, and be intentional. So you could talk a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of points, and some of these are exclamation points on what Rebecca and Marina just said. But I think obviously there is significant potential upside from a teaching and learning perspective, from a school operations perspective, and potentially even from a social connection perspective if these tools are used. And when I say these tools, I'm specifically talking about tools that are powered by generative AI, are used within a set of really thoughtful guardrails that are optimizing for kids' well-being. But I think that the knotty thing that we have to untangle is that there's also risks, right, associated with these technologies, and they're hard to qualify and quantify right now. But I think we are increasingly convinced that if we don't attempt to mitigate those risks up front, we never actually get to the full benefits of these technologies, because folks will begin to lose enthusiasm around them, right? And they'll be harder to adopt at scale in schools and outside of schools, frankly. So I sort of think about like two questions here. One is extremely practical or practical-ish, and the other is pretty theoretical and maybe bordering on the verge of philosophical. So the first question is really, how can we leverage generative AI tools to enhance social connection, not erode it? And I think there's some early indications that like there are some use cases where these tools can be used to have students working not independently, but in small groups, right? And reflecting on each other's work, and so on. The philosophical question, one that I've been thinking about, and I wouldn't say keeps me up at night yet, but is sort of trending in that direction, is what does it mean for children to live in a world where it is very hard to distinguish what is true and what is not, right? What does that do to kids' experience? And how does that inform their mental and social and behavioral well-being? And so that is a question that we are trying to parse. But I think, Amanda, it goes right back to your point about deepfakes and misinformation as the most prominent negative use case that's popped up so far.
Yeah, and just as a really interesting one of like character AI. So there are lots of student-facing tools that are either intentional or not intentional. So you've got your Magic Schools, your school AIs, your Mizzous that are chatbots that are supposed to be pedagogically focused. And then you've got the ones that are more like students find on their own, right? The consumer technology. So the Snapchat AIs, et cetera. But I think the most interesting one is character AI. So character AI is a tool that has 18 million avatars that you can talk to, and you can actually create your own. So you could talk to Marie Curie or Naruto, or someone from you can make it up. And what's really interesting is that they're very popular with 16 to 24-year-olds and even somewhat younger students, with the average use of around 2 hours. And then what they see is that they have this new feature called a group chat feature, which is a combination of real people and bots. But the thing that is so fascinating to me is that the only way that you know what is real or an avatar run by a generative tool is if you go in the group settings. So they did, like, it is undistinguishable, and it is actually something in which the group itself is starting to blur the lines between real and not real. And so I think that that is what's popular. That's 20% of the site traffic of ChatGPT. So it actually is something that I think is going to be really interesting. But I do think as we start thinking about these tools, like we might think of them as generative tools that we bring into schools, but I think really our focus right now is what kids are bringing with them that we may not know that they use. And so our next question is going to be like a little bit of a combo. So we're going to look at this idea of what do you actually think is your biggest fear or concern? But then what can we do as social workers or those that are in and around students to start mitigating that? And the answer may be, we don't know exactly yet, but I would love to get your perspective on what you think we can do. Starting with Marina.
Yeah, so again, thank you for raising this really important question, because we do have to acknowledge the fear and have these conversations more deeply. And so definitely my biggest fear and concern is that we know mental health is on the rise, adolescent suicidality rates are on the rise. And now I think about generative AI and bullying and how this could continue to exacerbate that. So that's definitely my biggest fear, is the cyberbullying and the impact on depression and suicidality. So I think a real response that we have to talk deeply now in this point in time with our school administrators, with school psychologists, school counselors, school social workers, and our educators, is thinking about how we're going to be addressing and providing crisis intervention supports for those students who are impacted by these deep fakes. This is going to be a real source of concern. And so I think about, again, the intervention aspect as a school social work of really supporting their mental health and connecting them to resources, but also addressing this as a school community so that we can create safe learning communities for all. And so I think about that more preventative stance as well, that us school counselors, school social workers, we need to have these conversations with our students about responsible and safe use, and also addressing cyberbullying and the impacts it has on mental health.
Oh man, I love that. I mean, I think it's like sometimes we wait till something happens and then we create the plan. It's very reactive and not proactive. But if we already know, again, it's already happening, this is how kids interact already. This is something that could exacerbate this. Like, let's be really, really intentional about doing that first and just being anticipatory. So like for the next, like say school year is about to end, but like, do you have a plan for this before the next school year? Do you have a training for students? Is there a decision tree of next steps? Are there examples? Like, I think that is such a unique and positive conversation to have. And it kind of goes next to guidance, but it's even different than that, right? And I think that could be, it's super, super tactical, which I love, Marina, but I do think that could be something that would really, really be helpful for next year and going forward. So that's really awesome. So Rebecca, what do you think? What is your biggest concern? And then how can we mitigate that?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to come up with just one. I want to elevate a little bit of what school social workers that were included in this data, what some of those issues and fears and concerns that came up, things that Andrew's touched on, concern about the impact on mental health, as Marina mentioned, and also how it interacts with the cognitive development of these young people. Potential exposure to inappropriate content, to inaccurate content, to biased content. Those concerns, potential cyberbullying and confidentiality risks. So there are a lot of them. And I think that coupled with, again, indications from the data that many school staff are concerned that families don't have the information they need to help put those guardrails around their young people. And also, again, that school social workers and other school professionals aren't being included as much as needed in those conversations. I think those are my biggest takeaways, just that there is such an immense amount of information in this area, and many parents and families are just trying to get food on the table and work and get their children to appointments, and having the time to wade through all this information is challenging. And so we just need to bring as many people, like Andrew said, that are close to children into these conversations.
That's great. And I just want to call out Patty in the chat, who's also talking about like doing an AI literacy event, not just for like teachers and students, but families. Like that could be a wonderful way to start to build those relationships too. Because one of the things that is really a unique part of this is that we can help like parents actually help their kids more with these tools, the same that there's productivity gains to be had for teachers using these tools effectively. It could be the same for students. And I think equipping parents with that too could help with some of those deeper connections that we sometimes miss as social workers, right? That we have trouble getting that cycle going and really getting that engagement with parents for a long period of time. So I think there are some other opportunities that could be done as well, which is super, super great. So
and
Andrew, Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Amanda, just because I didn't really sweep around to your last part of that question of how school social workers can assist with this. And I think school social workers very much are a link between homeschool and community. And so school social workers are uniquely positioned to help draw parents into those conversations, to put together resources, to maybe offer trainings or find those trainings that can be offered. And so I think they can be a really impactful part of the conversation.
Absolutely. And so Andrew, to you, same question.
Yeah, sure. I might filibuster a little bit here, Amanda. First, just on the question itself, I think we should avoid using the term fear, right? Probably a disservice for kids, just like treating generative AI powered products and tools as a silver bullet, which we know just doesn't exist in education. So I am unclear about the impacts. So I'm going to talk about what I'm concerned about more broadly, which is speed. And I think we have a tendency across the education ecosystem to operate under the adopt or be left behind paradigm, which I think the evidence would indicate is probably a fallacy, particularly as it pertains to education technology tools. But what that paradigm does is it forces folks to act to adopt emerging technologies at scale too quickly. And so I think a better approach, a more practical approach, would be small, contained, carefully evaluated classroom-based pilots that are staffed by cross-functional, holistic teams, right? Educators, school-based health staff, administrators. And I think all the folks participating in those pilots, by the way, should have really deep, robust, rigorous AI literacy training so that they are well informed about what they are going to encounter as they begin to engage with these tools and technologies. I think the real challenge here, right, is there aren't a lot of pieces of evidence around efficacy related to outcomes of any of these emerging technologies yet. And so I think it would be really compelling and potentially really helpful for the technology itself to get some proof of concept that these tools can really move the needle on student outputs and student outcomes. And I think the best way to do that is by these small contained pilots that are really carefully evaluated and staffed by cross-functional teams.
Yeah, and I think what's really fascinating, so like Microsoft right now is setting up a pilot, or they're calling it a private peer review because it can't be a co-pilot pilot apparently, for 13 to 17-year-olds using Copilot. But what's really interesting is that it's so tech led, like in the same thing, like I'm not sure what happened with Magic School or School AI or others. Like we don't have any evidence or any structure or support to actually know how these pilots are run before they're released widely. And I think that we had a question about the tools that are pedagogical. And I'm going to use this because Gen AI is not pedagogical, everybody, even with the best fine tuning and support. It's not a thinking machine. It's not a human. It's not a teacher. But I do think that there's a question of how do we actually start identifying those tools that we know are already impacting students and building space for those cross-functional teams, because we have this bad habit of like not coming together when something new happens and actually creating evidence in a non-siloed way. It's happening in tech, it's happening in schools and districts, but in very uneven ways. So maybe this is a call to action to actually have something that is like, we're going to test the top 5 student-facing products and actually see what this means. And we're going to include a mental health and well-being component, not just a pedagogy, not just an engagement, not just a student outcome, learning outcome piece. I think that would be really unique. And I think they're because we're all interested in this, maybe there's an actual opportunity for it to happen instead of just being talked about. So that's really interesting. Next question is this is our last big question, but what do you actually think is the positive that could happen around student well-being? There's been research from Atypical and others that show that people are using these tools for mental health and well-being. There's been, at least atypical said, that there was a lowering of suicidal ideation for some adults using these tools. We know they're using them. So like, what do you think is the opportunity for student well-being being supported by Gen AI?
Mhm. So I think about this in two ways, of the two opportunities. So one is actually the practitioner using these tools to support student well-being. So I think about my role as a school social worker. We know we have high caseloads. There might be only one school social worker for several grades or in a school setting. So I have multiple students that I'm supporting for their mental health. So to have these time-saving tools to help me be more efficient at my job, I could use generative AI to help me create intervention plan templates. I could have it help me generate ideas for counseling activities in my office. I could also use it to help create, campaigns for suicide awareness and anti-bullying campaigns. I think there's just immense potential and opportunity for these tools to really support and enhance the mental health services that our practitioners, like school social workers, school counselors, have in schools. And then the other piece is something else that we've been talking about, which is using AI as the companion to really support youth mental health. So I think about the app like Alongside, which is a chatbot generated specifically for adolescents to use alongside with schools, and it's created and developed by clinicians. And this sort of chatbot is available in partnership with schools for students to use it. And what I also really appreciate about this model is that students are accessing it to ask questions, to talk about their problems that they're experiencing. Sometimes they just need someone as like a sounding board to validate their feelings. But once it crosses the threshold of a student is reporting ideation, that they're suicidal, that they're in crisis, that's when they contact the school, so that there is that human crisis element component of that partnership, so that the school staff can then support that child who's in need and who's in crisis. So I think about how this won't be replacing our school social work role, but it really will enhance the opportunity for us to support. And I think about equity and access. This can be a real potential to support students who may not have access to a school social worker and counselor, but then also doesn't eliminate the human concern of the crisis piece. So I think there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah. And I mean, we are so understaffed, right? Especially in high schools around counselors and social workers. That is this a place to be able to do more of what we have and uniquely put in the human component. We built a wellbeing tool in Australia. That was my last job, and did research. And we found exactly what Alongside finds, that like students having the ability to ask for help and or to identify it even on their own. And then also, even if they don't, having that come and be lifted up and prioritized and triaged to a human is a really, really great way to like actually identify those students that have problems that you do not see. And I think that this is where like the ability to uncover what's below the surface, which we know is happening, I think is a really unique opportunity with a generative AI tool like Alongside. And we love Alongside. So that's really great. So Rebecca, to you, what do you think is the best use case for Gen AI and how it could potentially support student well-being?
So I have to say, it's funny. Marina and I have been in multiple meetings even this week together, and we did not talk about our answers to this, but she took a lot of the things that I wanted to say. So, but I do, again, I think a big thing is we do know that there are a lot of time-consuming tasks and understaffed at schools. And so there's the potential for these tools to help us be able to reach more students and be able to connect with more students. So again, I think that the barrier piece of that question is just ensuring that we're at the table to evaluate the various tools, to ask the questions, to determine which ones can be used in which ways, and ensuring that we still have, like Marina said, that human touch of a real human that evaluates some of that critical information and is that human point of contact with the students that need the support.
That's great. And I first of all, I'm just so glad that you're having a lot of conversations about this, Rebecca and Marina, though, because it makes me so happy that people are asking and listening. And the fact that we have over 200 people hanging out with us at a very last, like it's getting to last weeks of school kind of life, is a good indication. But it is interesting that you have so much overlap there, because I think that that's where we can do a focus, right? And like it has something that we could start with, and then we could start to move from there. So Andrew's always going to have one of the things I love about Andrew is that he is willing to be bracing and also filibuster and all these things. So I would be really interested in knowing what you think are the actual kind of potential positive, most positive impacts of Gen AI and student well-being.
Yeah, so maybe this is going to be counterintuitive coming from me, Amanda, but I think like if you broadly agree that one of the primary purposes of school and schooling is to build both social skills and social connection for kids, which we know has obviously significant bearings on overall well-being, then I think there's a real opportunity for generative AI to help, right? I think most social media is actually anti-social media, but there are corners of those ecosystems that actually have created really rich opportunities for kids to find other kids, right? And so I think if we can sort of replicate the good that is happening in pockets, in corners of the social media ecosystem, and figure out what analogs exist that potentially can be amplified, expanded, leaned into with generative AI powered tools and products, then there's a real opportunity not only to help kids build social skills and awareness, but social connection also.
I think that's great. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, everything that we think will be like fully bad for kids, like COVID was going, like there are kids that flew with online education and like will continue to fly with something different. So I think it's absolutely true about of all things. I'm gonna insert just one thing. I think that we are under, like, there's an opportunity for neurodivergent support, like supporting kids with neurodivergence that's really, really high. Whether that's students that might not feel comfortable with written communication because they're dyslexic, or that have unique needs around sensory issues, or have not been able to communicate at all, like because they're considered nonverbal, to be able to now create images, videos, the ability to have an avatar of yourself that could express things that you've never been able to express, I think is something that could like significantly impact student well-being. I think that I would love us to see more in those spaces first as a use case, because I think that we could really do pilots on that, but also the impact could be really, really large, really, really quickly. I mean, just the giving of someone a voice that never had one is like a unique place that we could do this work together. So we're coming up on time. So we have our last, I know we fixed it all, everybody. Student well-being's fixed, we got it. But I do want to stop with like we always like to be as practical as possible. And so like, what is your most practical strategy that you want people to take away with you in terms of supporting student well-being in this time, or kind of starting to gather evidence, or whatever you think is most important? So Marina, what's your idea?
So my idea really comes from stemming and creating a multi-tiered support plan for your schools, and really thinking about student well-being and AI adoption. And in that multi-tiered sort of support plan, really thinking about having a cross-disciplinary conversation with administration, the IT tech person, the librarian, your school support staff, like your school counselor, social workers, your educators, and really coming up with tiered interventions, from the crisis support to thinking about more the preventive place of bringing in families into this conversation, family workshops, but also student lessons and SEL lessons on digital citizenship, and but also cyberbullying. So I think there's a huge opportunity to really create this more thoughtfully, of a sort of like a multi-tiered intervention plan.
That's great. And if you're writing it, we'll support it. If you want to write it together, we're ready. Like, I think that, having those resources in hand for the start of the school year that people can use is an amazing idea. Rebecca?
So mine's kind of twofold. One is that piece of what Marina just touched on, making sure people are coming together to ask the questions, to have conversations with families. I think, Amanda, something you had said in our pre-discussion about this webinar is, I think it's also important that we create a safe space where parents can say, I don't know. like, what are my kids interacting with? What are these different things? And because if we don't give that space, then they're not going to come to the table, and we're not going to be able to have a full discussion. So that's one part of it. And then I think my other piece is balance, is going back to what we know is good for kids' well-being in general, right? All those basic things of making sure students are having balance, rest and sleep, that they're having time outdoors, that they're in green and blue spaces, that they're drinking water, right? Staying hydrated, the basic things, connecting with their family and friends, disconnecting from screen time, and then learning all sorts of different coping skills that help them, mindfulness and breathing and different things that help them manage and keep balance in their life.
First of all, like, we see this in the AI literacy work and adoption work we do, that it seems like we need to throw out the rule book because it's happening so quickly. But I think we need to lean into the rule book more, and those spaces, because that's going to give us the opportunity to like do the foundations and then support the ways we know, because it's moving so quickly that if we try to keep up with that and try to change and everything, but like, let's do the things that we know work, provide people spaces to be able to learn together, to be I know you didn't like the word fear, but some people are afraid, but maybe it's okay to be afraid in ways that are that are not spiraling, but intentional, safe spaces that lead to dialogue and next steps. But I think that that's a way to get our hands wrapped around it. Like the same thing with Marina, like, let's do the things we know that really work, and then talk about how we support this movement with generative AI instead of the other way around, I think is a really good piece of advice. So Andrew, you're going to bring us home. What is your most practical strategy?
I'm going to try to bring us home. I would offer two things. One is, I think following the evidence becomes incredibly critical here, right? With the technology advancing so rapidly, understanding what the evidence says and asking very specific questions about any technology that is being adopted and will be student facing is super critical, right? And so those are questions like, what evidence exists that the technology is successfully doing what it is intended to do? What evidence exists that the technology will do no harm? What evidence exists that the builder of these technologies has optimized for student well-being? Okay. And then my second suggestion is a maybe sort of very, very non-sexy one. But I think if we are trusting big tech, great. You shouldn't have any concerns. If you don't trust big tech, then we should be thinking about how we get builders of these products to optimize for student well-being. And I think the best way to do that is through procurement. So I would be encouraging folks to get their procurement officers, their districts, to think about building fundamental benchmarks across efficacy and data privacy and security and interoperability and access, among other things, that technology providers would need to meet to sell into schools, right? I think the only way we shift movement towards child well-being when we're building these products is by changing incentives. And the biggest opportunity we have to change incentives in K-12 is our purchasing power.
Okay, yeah, and I agree. And I think that what you just said, though, it goes way beyond generative AI. It just goes to like, we need to do better with our technology in schools. And I think that that's just across the board, a really important piece. But this might be what's really cool about this moment in time. This could be the lever for getting that for more than just generative AI, because people are paying attention in ways they've never paid attention before. And so I think that's a really great point. I just want to say thank you. Like, can we just give everybody, I know we can't do hearts, but I'm going to do a heart for everyone that's in the audience. So thank you so much to our amazing panelists, for also just Andrew and the team at Opportunity Labs, Rebecca, everyone at SWA, Marina. Like, we just really appreciate you putting this time and effort and evidence into the world at this important time. Like, it's just really, really, really important. And we want to hear more of this. And so I I love that we're able to have this discussion. And this also just thank everyone for coming. I mean, we kept, almost the whole group the whole time, a great conversation in the chat, and we just want to continue this work. So please, like, if you have good ideas and resources, we're always happy to hear them. But I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking a moment out of your time to think about students in a meaningful way. Like, that means a lot. And I think that it shows a lot for what we can do to bring that back to our schools and system worldwide at this point. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a good morning, night, lunch, go to bed, whatever time it is. We appreciate you all. And we look forward to having you all for our next webinar in a couple weeks. Thanks, everybody.